And you're recording today. Oh, that was sad. 12 people. 12 people
What?
for this water seminar. People that
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ron Kelly. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Now, they go to. Can you see my screen with the Follow the Water cover sheet? Okay.
Yes.
Now, can you see it in presentation mode? No?
not yet.
See the PowerPoint.
You see the PowerPoint
Mm-hmm.
in presentation mode or still with the one slide? And then
It's
the
in
blank
edit
slide?
mode.
Sir?
It's in edit mode.
Edit mode.
You want it in presentation mode. I don't know how to do that, but.
Yeah, well, I on my screen, I can see it in presentation mode. So let me do something here.
I don't know what to tell you.
Let me do this.
Ron, do you have two screens by any chance?
Yes,
You might be sharing the wrong screen if the
Yeah.
presentation mode's on the other one.
yeah. All right. Let me do this. Now, can you see it in presentation mode?
No,
Nope.
still in edit.
Right.
It's still in the edit mode.
All right. How about now?
Still edit mode.
All right.
There you go.
All right.
There you go.
Woo!
Man, good.
Okay, welcome everyone to part 2. Let me go back up here. All right, part 2, Follow the Water, Lake Conroe to Woodlands retail customers, the sequel. So as we talked about in the first part on Tuesday, the question for everybody to kind of think about as we're going through this presentation is 3 questions, and they're all mutually exclusive from each other. So does the community want the absolute lowest possible price of water today, period? That means only the minimum state and federal quality criteria and meet current demand. Or is the community willing to pay for the price of water today that is a 100% reliable in terms of quality, including aesthetics, and quantity for current demand? Or third choice, is the community willing to pay for the price of water today that is 100% reliable in terms of quality and quantity, and secure a long-term water supply that may not be needed by future residents for 20 or 30 or more years? So those are the questions to think about as we're going through this presentation. So the first part, we talked about basically the water at Lake Conroe, the contracts, the money. This is focusing on the GRP. So why and when was the SJRA GRP plan established? The rules were established by Lone Star back in 2010 or so. And we were one of over 30 sponsors of a GRP. And our GRP was submitted to Lone Star and was approved by their board on June 14th of 2011. They certified our GRP. So that began our GRP. So what is the GRP division? Well, it was created after the approval of the GRP by Lone Star. It's a separate enterprise. As you may have seen in our presentation on Tuesday, we have separate enterprises that are standalone. The costs and expenses incurred by that division can only be paid for by revenue generated from that division. So it's a wholesale water supply and groundwater management. That's what the GRP does. We have around 80 contracted participants. Some of those participants have multiple utilities. And so we serve about 149 utilities in this GRP. The customer oversight is provided by a 6-member GRP review committee that we'll get to later. We have approximately 23.7 full-time equivalents in this group. The reason that direct FTEs, the reason that's a fraction is because we share management between the GRP division and the Woodlands division. And so because of that sharing, there's a fraction of an FTE that's involved. You'll notice compared to our 10-year project plan, compared to the ones that we discussed on Tuesday, is very small. It's $3.6 million. That $3.6 million is only the replacement of the membranes. The membranes that we have in our facility are expected to last 8 to 10, 12 years, depending on how much use we get out of them. And that is the cost to replace them. There is no plans whatsoever to expand the surface water plant for any reason at this time in the 10-year project plan. And I know that's been a question by some folks, particularly on our GRP review committee. There's no plan to expand that plan in the 10-year project plan. And our G&A expenses that we talked about earlier, G&A is the division that has our accountants and HR and risk management and technical services in SCADA. It's our support group. And those costs to help pay for the allocated fund, the allocated services provided by that support group is based on the ratio of salary, G&A salary costs. So why was the SGRA GRP division created? Back in the negotiations for our contract with our participants for the GRP, we wanted to establish and maintain a separate operating division, a separate enterprise with a separate budget, separate book of accounts, separate revenue, separate costs. And so that's why we created the SGRA GRP division back in actually 2010. This is a map that shows generally where those 80+ participants are. You can see it's kind of spread out throughout the county, with the largest participants being the Woodlands and the city of Conroe. So how are the GRP participants represented in key decisions such as budget and rates? By contract, there is a 6-person GRP review committee, GRP review committee. And you have Mike Mooney, who represents the Woodlands. You have the city of Conroe that's represented by Duke Kuhn. You have Mike Stecker, who represents, who was appointed by Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District. And that group represents the independent, the IOUs, the private utility suppliers, and they are represented and selected by Lone Star. You have the small cities, and it's the small cities in the county does not include Conroe, and there is an election process. You can see that one is currently vacant. We have an election process by which those small cities go through and make nominations for a candidate, and then they vote for the candidate. So that's actually a voted in person. You have the MUDs east of 45 and the MUDs west of 45. Same process. The MUDs east of 45 select and vote on a candidate, and the MUDs west of 45 do so. Jackie Chance represents the MUDs west of 45. Rick Moffitt represents the MUDs east of 45. And again, as you can see, there are 5 current members, and there's 1 vacancy. That 1 vacancy should be filled by December of this year. And those 6 members vote on all items that go to our board that are related to the GRP, be it a contract, be it a budget, be it a rate order. We review all of that with the review committee, and then they vote to either recommend that our board consider passing, adopting a budget, a rate, a contract, whatever it may be, or not. To this date, we have never had our board pass a budget, pass a rate, execute a contract that had not been previously recommended by the 6-member GRP review committee. So how is raw water diverted from Lake Conroe to the surface plant? And the surface plant is located on the northeastern side of the lake. We have a raw water pump station that sits out in the lake. You can see the picture of it here. On the inside, we currently have 3 pumps. We have 2 pumps that can pump anywhere from 17 to 31.5 MGE. And we have a small pump that can pump from 9 to 15.75 MGD. And the reason those numbers are important is that this plant was originally sized to produce 30 MGD. So the anticipation was that we would be running those 2, alternating those 2 big pumps. And then on rare occasions when demand may be down, like maybe during the winter or something, we would use that small pump. We're going to be talking about in a minute about how we're only running the plant right now at 12 MGD to reduce the operations and maintenance to operations costs of the plant. So we're running that small pump, excuse me, a whole lot longer and a whole lot more than what we anticipated doing originally in the design. Right now, in the summertime, because the demands are high, we're able to run these, alternate between these 2 large pumps. This is a kind of a cartoonish type map of our facility. You can see where here's our pump station that is located in the lake. Raw water comes into our pretreatment area. Then it goes into our membranes. Then for filtration, it goes into granulated activated carbon, which is kind of like if you have a Brita filter on in your house, on your kitchen sink, it's like a really big Brita filter. And then it goes into storage tanks where it's disinfected and then it's pumped out into the system. And this is basically the picture of the process. You can see on the left are our plate settlers that we have, where in water there is really fine particles that's in raw water. We mix it with chemicals to help them clump together, and we slow down the flow. And when it gets to the sedimentation basins, it hits these plate settlers and settles out to the bottom, so that then clarified water can go to our membranes. The next picture you see are the microfiltration membranes by Paul that we have installed. They will take out particles to 1/40th the size of a diameter of a hair. So very, very small, takes out those particles. Then we go into our granulated activated carbon, which basically addresses taste and odor issues that may be in the water. Then we use disinfection. We use sodium hypochlorite or bleach to disinfect the water. It's stored in these ground storage tanks, and then it's pumped out into the system. The entire process that we have is monitored in many locations. We monitor flow, we measure pressures, we measure chemical concentrations, we monitor our equipment. Are bearings running hot or not? Are they running at all? Are valves opening and closing like we want to? We monitor our entire system, both in the plant and at all 17 receiving facilities where water is pumped to and then delivered to our customers. We also are able to control similar points throughout our system. So we have a very intricate system of monitoring and controlling. You see here is one of our programmers working on developing a screen that our operators would see as they're monitoring the process throughout 24 hours a day. The water that we produce gets delivered to 17 different receiving stations. There are 6 of them that are in Conroe. We have one that's at Mid-South going south. We deliver water to the 5 water plants in the Woodlands. And then we deliver water to the city of Oak Ridge North, to Southern Montgomery County Mud, to Rayford Road. And one that's not shown on here is a little bit further east of Rayford Road is Mud 99. So you can see here a picture on the right is a picture of water coming into one of our receiving facilities. All of our water is delivered to at the top of a ground storage tank, so that there's an air gap between the water that we deliver and the water that is mixed with that particular utility. They mix groundwater with their surface water, and then they're responsible for the water quality and the quantity from that point on. So a little bit on following the money. And
Ron,
yes,
can I ask a question?
sure.
So on the previous slide, I thought I heard you say that the plant was in the northeast part of Lake Conroe, but on this previous slide, it shows that it's a proposed SGRA surface water treatment plant. Is that?
It's on the northeast side of the dam. I'm sorry, not of the lake, but of the dam.
Okay, and so this is no longer proposed, this is actual.
This is actual, yes.
Okay.
So a little bit on follow the money, and we kind of use the graphic of buckets. So we charge a pumpage fee to everybody who is in the GRP for groundwater that is they use. That charge is $2.88 per 1,000 gallons. For those who are receiving surface water, the rate is $3.30 per 1,000 gallons. Now, some ask, well, why are people paying for a groundwater pumpage fee for not receiving any surface water? And you have to go back to the whole concept of the GRP from the very beginning. Was that the original rules by Lone Star was that everybody who pumped more than 10 million gallons a year in groundwater had to reduce their groundwater usage by 30%. And so in order, and we'll go back to the previous slide, in order to not have to build a pipeline system that went to all 80 of these customers that we have and convert each one of them to 30%, the concept was to over-convert your largest customers that were in the central core area of the county, which were Conroe and the Woodlands and people along those routes, over-convert them so that those remaining customers outside of that core area could stay on groundwater. But yet they benefited by being part of a GRP and the whole groundwater reduction part, meeting the rules for Lone Star. And that was the way the rules were set up by Lone Star, is if you join together as a group, that group as an aggregate had to meet a 30% reduction. Each one individually didn't have to meet a 30% reduction. And so that's why those who are not receiving surface water, based on the old rules, they were benefiting from not having to convert by having others over convert. And so there had to be a way to provide fairness for them to participate and pay for that over conversion. And so the methodology of doing that is our participants who pump groundwater pay $2.88. Those who receive surface water pay $3.30. The revenue from those 2 buckets go into the GRP general fund. And that's different than the general fund that we talked about on Tuesday, which is the SGRA general fund. And by bond covenants, we first have to use those funds to pay for O&M expenses, which includes legal fees. That's a requirement of our bond covenants. The next thing we have to pay for with money from the GRP general fund is we have to pay for our annual debt service. Our annual debt service is about $34.6 million a year. So we have to first pay expenses, then we have to pay for debt service. Then we have to make sure that we have our debt service reserve fund full. We are required by our covenants, bond covenants, to have 1 year's worth of debt payments in our debt service reserve fund. And currently we do, and it's currently filled. And the next flow of money is once we've paid off our O&M costs, we paid off our debt service, annual debt service, then money goes into an operating and rate stabilization fund. Then if there's money left over from that, then we put money into an emergency reserve fund. And then after that, you put money into the repair and replacement fund. Now, currently that's the way the flow of funds is supposed to work, but that's not where we're at right now. If all of those funds were fully funded, which they're not, then money then would go back to paying in, putting more money into the operating and rate stabilization fund. But that's not where we're at. The GRP fund, general fund, we have a small amount of money in the operating and rate stabilization fund. We're supposed to be having 6 months worth of operating and rate stabilization, eventually looked at 3 months. We sometimes run on 10 days worth of money. Basically, if you think about a checking account, we're running about 10 days, sometimes 10, as low as 10 days worth of cash in our reserve fund. We have $0 currently in our emergency reserve fund, and we have $0 in our repair and replacement fund. That is because of the desire to by our review committee and some customers to keep our rates as low as possible. Our rates aren't high enough to keep enough money in the operating and rate stabilization fund, nor to provide any funds for emergency reserves or into repair and replacement. And there are other funds that are set up by our bond covenants and our contracts. There is a construction escrow fund, and there's a surplus reserve fund. There's a little bit less than $1.5 million left over from the bonds that were sold. We sold about $540 million worth of bonds for the project, and there's a little less than $1.5 million left over from that, and that is sitting in the construction escrow fund. We can only use those funds for capital improvements, nothing else. So what budget assumptions have been made during this time of regulatory uncertainty? There's been a very clear message from our customers to keep the rates as low as practicable. So we've developed the fiscal year 22 budget and we've been doing this since the beginning, since we've had assets, is to make sure we have a responsible management of our $500 million worth of assets. We have the plant, we have 50 miles worth of pipeline. We have to continue to maintain, provide preventative maintenance on those facilities. It doesn't make any sense to invest that much money and just let it rust away like a bucket of bolts. And so we have to spend money not only operating it, but having normal maintenance on there to keep it running reliably. We've been able to reduce the annual production of the plant down to 12 MGD and deliver to 7 participants to keep the cost as low as possible. You recall on that picture of the two big pumps and one small pump. That one small pump will only go down to 9 MGD. I can only run that plant at 9 MGD. That is the absolute lowest I can run it in any given day. And the problem is I can't run it at 9 MGD though 365 days a year, because I have some other intermediate pumps and meterings that won't go down that low. So the lowest we can run our plant on an annual average is 12 MGD. We run about, in the winter time, December and January, we may be running at 9.5 MGD. Now here in the summer, we're running close to 20, but it averages out over the year at 12 MGD. And we develop then, based on those criteria, we develop a GRP pumpage fee and a surface water fee to meet the revenue requirements. So for those in the Woodlands, and really for all of our GRP customers, we start at the original intent of this design was to be that those receiving surface water would get about a 65% surface water, and then they could use 35% groundwater, which would mean in the wintertime, they'd be almost at 100% surface water, but in the summertime, because of peak demands, they would have to ramp up their use of groundwater wells. But on an annual average, it would be 65% surface water, 35% groundwater. And that's when we were running at the plant at 28, 29 MGD. But because of the desire to cut down on the cost of the GRP and run it only at 12 MGD, the numbers are kind of reversed. So those receiving surface water run at 35% surface water and 65% groundwater. Now, and how did we get that number for fiscal year 22? If you look at the total average of our projected demand for the 7 GRP participants who receive surface water, their total demand is about 11.5 billion gallons of water in fiscal year 22. The total annual average projected production by the treatment plant, if you take 12 MGD times 365 days a year, is about 4.4 billion gallons. Divide that 4.4 by 11.5, you get 38%. So we round it to 35%. So that's how we got to the 35% number. Now, we planned the same thing in 2021, but there's an anomaly in 2021. We had a lot of rain in the earlier part of the year, in this calendar year, which reduced the total demand. So that bottom number was lower, but we kept on producing at 12 MG on an annual average, about 4.4 billion gallons. So that ratio, we actually hit around 50%, pretty close to 50% in this fiscal year that ended on a couple of days, 2 weeks ago. So that's how we got to the 35% surface water, 65% groundwater blend for fiscal year 22. Some folks have asked, well, why can't we get more surface water? just send us more surface water. As we discussed, producing more surface water increases the cost. And so if we send more surface water and increase the production of our plant, we're going to raise the costs and the rate for everyone. But the desire universally, or a majority for our participants, was keep the cost as low as possible. Well, I can't keep the cost as low as possible and produce more surface water at the same time without raising rates. So that's the balance that we're trying to meet. So why do operational costs have to increase? If we're going to produce more water by the surface water plant, We have to divert more raw water, and we have to pay for that raw water. It costs more energy, more power to run the plant. We have to use more chemicals to treat the water. We have to use more granular activated carbon. We have more water quality sampling and testing. And we have I told you at the beginning where we have these little fine floatables that are in the water, then the raw water that we mix with chemicals to settle out so we can run through the treatment process. That settled out material ends up being sludge that has to be hauled away, which costs money. So there's an increase in operational costs each time we increase the production of the plant. So back in 2019, our GRP review committee, we did a rate study for GRP, and they set these goals for us for our target levels of our reserves. We originally had a 6-month, as I mentioned, a 6-month operating reserve and rate stabilization fund. We were never able to hit that much. We were never able to have enough money to have that high of a cushion, you might say, in the bank account. So they lowered the targeted reserve level to 3 months. And as I mentioned before, there are several times that we've hit only 10 days. Well, that's 3 months of operating is about $4.6 million. They wanted us to have a $2 million fund in an emergency account. If we had something break, we had a lower water line break, whatever, we would have money in the bank to go pay for it. Kind of like you and your own finances. Your car breaks down, you got a little fund sitting over there that you can pay for. Your air conditioner goes down, you have a plumbing issue, whatever. You have an emergency fund sitting over there so that you can pay for fixing that issues. Right now we have zero. The desire is to have $2 million. Right now we have zero. On the repair and replacement fund, that was set up to be a fund. We knew that our membranes have a life of around 8 to 10 years, and I told you about $3.6 to $3.4 million to replace them. The original plan was to set aside money each year for 10 years, a couple $100,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year, set it aside and build up that account so that when it came time to repair and replace equipment, then you would have the money and you wouldn't have to go out and sell bonds or figure out some way to raise that extra money for that fiscal year. It's just like when same thing, you have tires on your automobile. You have things that you know that you're gonna have to replace in your home. You set aside money a little bit each month or each year so that you know that when it comes time to replace it or replace a car or whatever it may be, that the funds are there so that 1 year you don't get that big hit. Well, we're not fortunate to have that, so we have $0 in the repair and replacement fund. And so the goal by the GRP review committee in 2019 was to start moving toward having a set of reserves of about $10 million in the account. And not do it over 1 year, but over a period of 3 or 4, 5, 6 years, start building up that reserve. We still aren't at that point yet. Again, because we're got a double whammy. We're trying to keep our costs as low as possible. But we also, as many of y'all know, we have some customers that aren't paying the full bill. We have 2 customers that aren't paying anything at all. And we're spending about $2 million in litigation against some of those customers. Which is recognized here. Our total demand of all of our customers projected for 22 is equivalent to about 52.7 million gallons per day. Again, we're producing about 12 million gallons per day annual average of surface water. Our budget includes generally an inflation factor of around 3%. There's some items that are lower than that, and there's some items that are higher than that. We're all starting to see the inflation that's occurring. One of the key things that's in the budget for fiscal year 22 is that there is no provisions in that for uncollected revenue. In other words, those folks who continue to not pay the full bill, there are two of them, and the two that are not paying anything at all, the assumption in the budget, as requested by our customers, was to assume that it was that was going to be paid, that uncollected revenue was not going to exist. Well, it is existing. They are not paying. And so that's potentially a deficit. Litigation, as I mentioned, our budget is about $2 million a year for litigation regarding our customers who are not paying and associated issues. Lawsuits that they have against us, lawsuits that we're trying to get courts to allow us to recoup that money from them. And our staffing has remained static. And again, our debt service remains is about $34.6 million. So what's the bottom line for fiscal year 2022? Is as I mentioned before, our GRP pumpage rate is $2.88 per 1,000 gallons. And our surface water rate is $3.30 per gallon. The way the Woodlands sets it up, and all of our customers treat it differently, particularly those who receive surface water. In the Woodlands, what the Woodlands Water asked us to do was to charge. We charge the division. GRP charges the division the 288 and the 330. What the MUDs requested that the Woodlands division charge them is a single rate. And so you can just mathematically take, if I got a pumpage fee in groundwater is 65%, and you take 288 times 65% of your total demand, and then you take surface water rate at 330 times 35% of your total demand, and that averages out to $3.03 per 1,000 gallons. So you should see on your bill pass through, quote unquote, pass through of $3.03. You will note, if you go look at some of your neighbors that are around you, that some of them charge well greater than that average. Matter of fact, there are some that maybe even be to the north of the Woodlands that charges well above the 330, and they have the same blend as the Woodlands. Now the difference there's a difference because the pumpage fee and the surface water delivered is based on what's metered at the well and metered at the well. What is paid for by the MUDs is what is the total of what is metered at each customer. There is a water loss between what is metered at the well and sent out from the 5 plants in the Woodlands to what is metered at the retail customers. And that difference, that delta, is included in the wholesale rate for the Woodlands. Here's a comparison of the different GRP rates around us. This concept of addressing groundwater reduction in our area is not new to this area. It is repeated in several counties to the south of us. And here's a couple of their rates. So our rate in 21, the slide was a little old, a little dated. In 21, it was 273 and 315. The rate that took effect on September 1st is 288 and 330. The West Harris County Water Authority, their rate is 345 and 385. The North Harris County Regional Water Authority rate is 460 and 505. And the North Fort Bend water rate is 425 and 460. Now, theirs is a little higher. Theirs is higher than ours because they are actually in the next phases. They are recognized that they have to do even more to reduce groundwater dependency in the area. And so they are on the next phase of their conversions. And so they are taking out more debt, building more pipelines, expanding the northeast plant in the city of Houston. And so that's why their rates are higher than our rates. So you can look at those as a comparison, but there's not truly apples to apples. But a point on this is you can see that folks to the south of you are paying more money and paying higher rates because they realize that they need to do more on groundwater reduction in their areas. So why doesn't the SGRA operate the surface water facility at its design rate of 30 MGD? I've mentioned this before. Our participants have sent a clear message that you want rates as low as possible. Through all these times right now, particularly with the Lone Star rules where they are or aren't, keep it as low as possible. So increasing our production, anything greater than 12 MGD, increases the operational cost. And increasing the operational costs would increase rates for all participants. And the message we received is that's not acceptable. So that is the end of part 2.
Ron, can I ask a question? This is Betty Doherty.
Yes, ma'am.
So basically, we're keeping our rates low, but we're also subsidizing other entities that aren't paying, and then some that aren't paying their full share.
That is a correct, that'd be a corrective assumption. Yes, ma'am.
And how much did you say the litigation costs were?
It's about $2 million a year.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what I always say. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. Our water system failed because nobody took care of it. So, you know, I'm real interested in and concerned about the shortfall in terms of repair and upkeep. I know there's nothing you can do about that. I'm just stating my concern.
Are there any other questions? Because I have a, let me stop sharing my screen. Because I have a question for the group. Part 3 of this presentation, which covers the woodlands specifically, is about 20 slides. I can cover it in about 25 minutes. I'll leave it up to you. It's 12:47. We can go ahead and do part 3 today and not do part 3 next Tuesday, or we can stay as planned and we can do part 3 that covers the woodlands next Tuesday. I'll leave that up to the group.
Well, we've circulated the announcement widely that we have something planned for next Tuesday. So I don't know. And I see someone has just voted part 3 on Tuesday.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, Ron, this is Sue Ellen Myers.
Yes, ma'am.
Just very elementary here. So tell us why you have to still keep supplying water to the people that aren't paying for it, to the 2 entities that aren't paying for it?
Oh, the 2 entities that are not paying for it altogether aren't receiving surface water.
They're not, okay.
They are groundwater pumpers only.
And
they are not receiving surface water.
this just seems so elementary. I mean, you are between a rock and a hard place. People yelling at you that they want the lowest possible water. Well, I mean, I want to say, so you're in the Canford, you got the water. So say, this is how much it costs. It just, how do people not get that, right, cost rise on everything? This just,
One thing is, we start on budgeting. We start presenting data to our GRP review committee in January. And we present data in January, February, and March. In April, we had a workshop where we provided them the draft budget. And then we had a meeting where we discussed it, and then they voted on it in May. As y'all know, through all this COVID that we've had, all of our meetings have been produced electronically. Everybody's been able to, much easier to participate. And I can tell you from a personal standpoint, from a frustration, is that for years we had particularly the people who are no longer paying, are not paying enough, are not paying the full bill, never raised questions about the costs until it came time to want to sue. And so that's the frustrating part. And there just isn't enough public participation in meetings. I mean, we may have 1 or 2 comments, a month that talks about it. And we have a lot of comments now. 2 of the members of our GRP review committee, we have litigation with. And so there's lots of discussions now about costs and issues and so forth. But there just isn't enough participation and dialogue amongst more of the people within the county about costs and provide comments. And that's the frustrating part on our side is that we lay out all the data there, and we realize it's a lot of data and it can be complicated. But it's like this year, we didn't receive hardly any comments on our rates. But now that we get past September the 1st and our notices went out that our rates have increased, we have people who are asking a lot of questions like, we've been covering all of our rates and how our contracts are built, how our budgets are built for 6 months, and no one paid attention to it until now. And so that is frustrating. So, see, I had some other comments up here. How does GRP review committee, except for the elected persons, come to serve on the committee? That's a good question. The Woodlands appoints their representative, and their representative is Mike Mooney, the deputy general manager there now. The city of Conroe appoints, the city council appoints their member, and their member is council member Duke Kuhn. Like I said, Lone Stars, they appoint the person that represents the IOUs. All the rest are elected by the MUDs. Is the treatment process and monitoring process regulated, required, or is this a decision made by SGRA? That's a decision made by, well, there are some things that we have to prove to the TCEQ and the EPA that we're meeting guidelines for water quality, but the rest is on us to try to make as efficient and effective treatment process as we can. Why do you have to continue to provide water to customers that do not pay your full amount? And I think I've answered that one. Part three. Okay. So, and $2 million for legal. When does that end? I wish I knew. It seems like every step of the way, and all the court proceedings are public information. And if you really have a boring life, you can read it all. We live it every day. It seems like every step of the way, no matter what the ruling is, how simple the ruling is, there's always somebody that wants to appeal that decision by somebody. And so it's always a constant, it's a constant thing, and the courts take forever to go through. Right now, there's 4 lawsuits relating all this, both in district courts and one in federal court. And justice moves very slowly. If we had to guess how long it's going to take, probably 3-5 more years, maybe more, maybe 10. I don't know. Depends on how many times people want to, how the rulings go. If we don't feel that a ruling is fair or just, we will appeal it. If others on the other side don't feel that the ruling is fair or just, they'll appeal it. And so it just keeps on going over and over and over again. Eventually it'll end, but I would say not anytime soon. Is the GRP really compensated for the service? No. They are not compensated by the GRP. They are either retired or they are paid by the entity they represent, but they are not paid by your rates. Would you remind us briefly why groundwater usage reduction is the goal? That was we're basing all this on the rules that existed back in 2000, well, actually until a year ago, based on groundwater reduction. Those were the rules. We sold $500 million worth of bonds to be able to meet those rules. We have contracts with 80 entities based on those rules. Now that the rules are gone, that doesn't change the fact that we have $500 million worth of debt, nor does it change that we have 80 contracts or contracts with 80 entities. And then since water issues have been on my radar, it seems that SRA has ramped up education via website and media. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of information, education. I appreciate everyone that's on this call. The problem is there's not enough of you. There are 400,000, 500,000 people that live in Montgomery County, and there's a relatively small handful that really are involved in the water issues because they're complicated, and we know people have living their lives, and we've got all kinds of things going on in the world today. We got COVID, and people have to pay rent and do their jobs, and trying to dive into the complex that is water isn't something they have time for, and that's unfortunate. What happens if you default on the bond? Good question. If we default on the bonds are held actually by the Water Development Board. And so what they did is they went out and sold debt to generate cash to be able to then give to us in the form of a bond. So if those bonds are defaulted on, then the state of Texas doesn't have any way to pay the debt that they generated from their sale of the bonds to other bondholders. The state of Texas is not going to default on their bonds. So what would happen is, if we default, then the Water Development Board would have to go to the state legislature and say, Montgomery County is not willing to pay for these bonds, their debt service. And so we need to get a general funding from the general fund, from the state general fund, to pay for that debt service that the Water Development Board owns. Now, a lot of y'all are involved in politics. Could y'all imagine what that discussion would look like on the House and Senate floor in Austin? As everybody is trying to get their own pieces of pie of dollars, and then Montgomery County comes in and says, we need $34 million a year to pay for this debt service that Montgomery County is not willing to pay. probably would have some lively discussions and debates. So that's how that would work. What are the qualifications to be an appointed GRP review board? Well, again, they're appointed by, the only appointments are by Conroe, so there really aren't any written qualifications. Okay, it's City of Conroe decides who they feel they want to represent them. The Woodlands trustees decides who they want to represent the Woodlands. And Lone Star decides who they want to represent the private utility operators.
And isn't that the problem, Ron? I mean, we've got a bunch of people that are regulating you that don't have any sense of actual business sense or sense about water at all. So,
Well, remember, our review committee doesn't regulate us. They just help guide us on budgets and rates and whatever. One of the things, so that's the regulator is Lone Star Groundwater Conservation District. Our review committee just responds to, you know, what the rules are and what they're paying. And what's been an interesting dynamic, you bring that up, is there are, I think this is safe to say, there are different review committee members work differently on how they communicate with the people they represent. Okay. And a lot of the people that they represent never even provide comments to them or to us. And so again, it needs to be more people involved. So Lone Star has changed the rules and seemingly would like us to be dissolved. What is their end game? I do not know the answer to that question. I wish I knew, but I don't know. Any other questions? I appreciate your time. It's 101. We'll see you next Tuesday at noon. And Tuesday, we're going to dive specifically into the Woodlands. Water gets delivered to the Woodlands and how it gets mixed, and then the how money flows within the Woodlands and the muds.
Thank you, Ron. This is fabulous.
I appreciate
Thanks
your time.
very
And again, all of these PowerPoints are on the Woodlands Water website. Thanks, everybody.
thanks.
Thank you.